welcome back. I mentioned last week that we're going to bring you a little dose of Elvis every single week, and we're back with him today. Now we're going to feed him again for you. It's always exciting. Zach's going to move him around here and then we'll move him back, but we're actually going to do something a little different today. We'll bring the camera in as well so you guys can get in that little bit closer and kind of see what we see as we're feeding him. Now Elvis is of course our large resident male saltwater crocodile, and here in Australia we have two species of what we call crocodilian. That is the saltwater crocodile, the larger of the two, and then the smaller freshwater croc. A big male freshie, that's what we call them most of the time, will get to about 3 meters in length. They have a long skinny jaw structure, they have very sharp teeth, very pointy teeth, and they are primarily a fish-eating croc. They don't grow large enough nor powerful enough to see humans as a potential food source. They're more feeding on, as I mentioned, fish, frogs, and potentially smaller mammals. The saltwater crocodile like this is a medium to large sized mammal specialist, and of course that includes us. We are medium to large sized mammals, and we are certainly a viable food source for a saltwater croc. Now I mentioned that word before, crocodilian. Now the crocodilians are a family of reptiles, and they're found right throughout the Americas, Africa, Southeast Asia, and of course here in Australia. And there's about 27 species of crocodilian. These encompass the gharial, you've got caiman, alligator, and then of course your true crocs that we have in this country. Now they're all beautiful animals, they're all quite unique. Some species stay quite small. For example, the Chinese alligator might only get to 5 or 6 feet in length. Dwarf caiman, same deal. And then some, like the saltwater crocodile, the Indian gharial, and your false gharial from Southeast Asia, they can get enormous, over 5 meters in length. And the saltwater croc is the largest of the lot. Now, very unfortunate, over half of the world's crocodilian species are classified as threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. 2 examples of critically endangered species would be that Chinese alligator I just mentioned, as well as the Philippine croc. Now, fortunately, our 2 species in this country, they're doing quite well, but that is because in the late 1960s and 70s, we started to protect them, and in 1973, finally, they were made a protected species, could no longer be hunted, and these days, saltwater crocs are doing far better in the wild than they were during that period. Now, I'm going to bring out Elvis in here. You'll notice we've got nice clear water. You don't have this luxury in Northern Australia. In the wild, they're utilising that dark, murky water to disguise themselves, to hide themselves. Splashing myself in the face a bit. Come on out. That's water, I swear. He's going to head back in there. Whilst he's sitting here, we can get in a little closer and take a look at him.
Can we?
Yeah, go for it. He's a beautiful animal. He's sitting here right now. Right now he's got the top of his head exposed. His eyes, his ears, and his nasal discs. You can actually hear him exhaling a little bit there. And his head alone probably weighs 60 or 70 kilos. Phenomenal. Now we've got another bit of food here. I'm going to sneak past him here. And we're going to bring him out onto this part, which we call the island, and we are going to demonstrate a tail walk. Now this is something that a small crocodilian, 1, 2, potentially up to 3 meters in length, would use a lot in the wild to snag something like a roosting bird or a flying fox over the water. Now they can still do it when they're large like this. They're a little more cumbersome, a little more heavy, but he's also pretty smart, Elvis. He's worked out that he can use this shallow water, and particularly this corner, to use his feet and bounce off the bottom. Now this is far more typical of wild crocodile behaviour. He's underneath the water, just a few inches, but you'll notice he's not making a single ripple as he moves. He's 450 kilos. And as I mentioned, if this was dark, murky water, you would have no idea that there was a big croc sitting right there. Now their sense of smell, very, very good. I'm going to dip that piece of bone in the water there for him. He'll smell that, he'll pop to the surface, and then we should get a couple of jumps out of him. Right now he's luring me in that little bit closer. It's not something you really want to fall into. Very sneaky here, notice how he's hugging the side of the pond. Alright. lost our food. Might grab that, might not. I'm sure I can distract him with this bit here. On the surface now, not mucking around. It should come out nicely for us. I want to try and lift that head a bit. Alright, and there we go. Now that was kind of maybe 50 or 60% of what he's truly capable of. When he really wants a bit of food, he's really energized. I should get this head, almost level with mine. Hard to speak now, the heart's going pretty quick now. Fortunately, he's gone back into the water. Hopefully he stays there because we're going to come back over toward the fence. I'm going to turn my back on the croc, which I never do. And I'll answer a few questions. That's this one.
So, what goes into being able to train you to be able to work with an animal like Elvis?
Yeah, a fair bit, as you can imagine. They are potentially one of the most dangerous animals when we come into contact with. And there's a lot of stuff that is behind working with the croc. It's not like you come in here on your first day ever working at Reptile Park and you're in there feeding large saltwater crocs. Myself and the other guys who work here, we've had years of experience with reptiles as a whole. A lot of my experience, my early experience was with snakes. I came in here, I was very young, only 19 years old when I was put on full time. And so what I started doing, just to ease into it, was work in the yard, test the water, mow the lawn, all those mundane tasks that get you used to working in an environment that houses a large saltwater croc. And then eventually, as time goes on, you work your way up to physically working with the croc and feeding him.
Does Elvis have a favourite kind of food?
It's hard to say. He's not fussy, that's for sure. He'll take whatever's on offer, really. Today he got chicken, which is a lot of his diet and certainly one of his favourites. But he really likes red meat as well. So today he got some beef. Have fed him roo. We'll feed him deer every now and again. So as I mentioned, not fussy, but he does have a few that he tends to come out a little harder for.
In the wild, what do they eat?
In the wild, as I mentioned, a big saltwater croc, 3.5 meters and above, would be feeding almost exclusively on medium to large sized mammals. So if this croc was living as he was originally in Darwin, what he would be doing is waiting on the edge of a river for something to come down to the water and take a drink. Typically something around the size of a wallaby, kangaroo, and potentially in the top end, a large water buffalo. Now, a water buffalo would weigh about 1,000 kilos, which is over double the weight of Elvis himself. But they're so powerful, they can grab that animal on the head, they drag it into the water, and then they'll very simply drown it. You see a lot of documentaries showing that big head shake and the death roll. That'll typically come after that prey animal is dead. They can only eat a fairly small portion at a time, so what they have to do is rip and tear the animal apart. Their stomach is about the size of a basketball. He could only eat 20 or 30 kilos in a single go. So they have to rip and tear the animal apart in order to consume it, and they won't consume the entire animal.
Now, you just mentioned before that he came from Darwin. Do you want to talk about his story, when he came to the park, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So Elvis is a wild caught croc, as are most large, particularly male crocs right around the country. And he started out in the top end, up in the Northern Territory, close to Darwin. Now, typically, when crocs get a bit of size about them, they become really confident and they start to hang around in certain areas. Now, Elvis here was hanging out close to fishermen, in their boats, popping up next to the boats, and of course, when you've got a croc this size popping up next to a tinny, it's quite intimidating. So he was eventually classified as a rogue or nuisance crocodile. He hadn't done anything to get that label, but he was labelled as that, and as a result was removed from his environment and placed into a crocodile farm. Now, a big male like this in a croc farm is there to breed, to make more crocs basically, mate with the females, they'll produce eggs, hatchlings, etc. Now, Elvis had other ideas. He lived his life in the wild. He was a dominant male. You can see that by the lack of scars across his body. He's in pristine condition. He was the top dog in his natural environment. And basically, he didn't want to hang out with other crocs, and that includes females. Sometimes you'll see that big male crocs They just don't care about any others, including girls. So when he got to the Croc farm, they tried to introduce females to Elvis, but unfortunately, because those girls were in a confined space with him, he didn't want them there, he killed them. Now it's quite brutal, but it just goes to show how powerful a large male croc is. They're more than capable of killing even other crocodiles. So quite incredible, but not for the females. They ended up thinking this croc's not going to be great here. We've made a bit of a mistake, let's get rid of this croc, and fortunately we were able to put our hand up and take him on here at the Reptile Park in 2007.
Is he held solid like by himself for that reason? Because he didn't get along with the girls?
Yeah, correct. I have no doubt in my mind if we were to try and introduce a female croc into this exhibit now that he's already been in here for over a decade, he's got his established territory, not interested in other crocs as I mentioned, and he would certainly remove them the only way he knows how, and that is by killing them. Male crocs, even worse. If we were to put a smaller male croc in this exhibit with Elvis, that male would be dead very, very quickly. Now, you see Elvis is making his way out of the water, and you'll notice when he's walking like this, they're quite sluggish, they look really slow. And that's because they're not designed to move around on land. They've got those short, stumpy legs, and they've got a huge, big, fat tail as well that weighs them down. So what they're really designed to do is that one explosive action at the water's edge to grab a prey item, but after that, they really can't go much further. And that is why it's always a good idea to stay at least 5-6 meters back from the water's edge, because if you do, then you are more than out of that initial strike range of a saltwater croc.
So he's quite heavy, so what are the body mechanics of him being able to actually launch out of the water?
Yep, so what he'll do, they'll utilise the bottom of basically whatever they're in. So in this pool here, he'll utilise the bottom of the pool, particularly in these shallower sections, and he'll plant his feet. That enables him to get a bit of grip and push himself forward. And he's not only pushing himself forward, at the same time he's using that big muscular tail I just spoke about. And you'll notice if you watch back on the feed, he moves the tail rapidly from side to side. That is what propels them up and out of the water. Once they're this far out of the water and even further, then they're virtually stationary. They can't do much else. He'll slowly make his way back into the water, regain that energy, and then he can put on another one of those strikes. But they cannot do consecutive, repetitive strikes because they use a lot of energy when they do.
Have you had any close encounters yourself, or has Keith had any close encounters with Elvis here at the park?
We haven't. No one's ever been basically grabbed by Elvis, and that's a fantastic thing because we know at the front of our mind, an animal this size versus a mammal our size, it's never going to end. This croc would kill you, and it would do so very, very quickly. We know that. We don't scoot around that fact. What we have had happen is him grab inanimate objects that we've been working in here with, so like hoses, pool scoops, and even quite a long time ago, I think about 9 or 8 years ago now, he actually grabbed a lawnmower into the pool, grabbed it off one of the fishes that was mowing the lawn, and basically sat on the bottom of the pool with the lawnmower in his mouth and did what he thought he was doing best, and that's killing that threat, that basically invader of his territory. Big male crocs are incredibly territorial.
How old can they get?
Crocodilians as a whole could live anywhere in excess of 80 years. They actually have quite a similar lifespan to a human. Now that's going for most species. There are exceptions. For example, smaller freshwater croc I spoke about at the start of the video, they have been recorded living in excess of 120 years of age. So they do have the ability to live a very, very long time. And they've been around for a very, very long time. As a whole, crocodilians have been on the face of the earth for about 260 million years, and in the form we see here today, 65 million years unchanged.
Can saltwater crocodiles go into other water, or does it always have to be saltwater?
No, so the name saltwater crocodile is incredibly misleading. This species will actually spend the majority of their time in freshwater, and that's because they're feeding on those mammals I spoke about. Kangaroo, wallaby, they're not going down to the beach to have a drink of salt water. No one likes to drink salt water. They're going down to freshwater billabongs and rivers, and that is where they know they can get food items, so they hang out in those areas. The reason that they're called a saltwater crocodile is because they are very salt tolerant. They can go out kilometers into the ocean if they want to. They can swim around out there, but they're not going to be getting food items out there. So very misleading, but they are found in a variety of waters, including fresh, brackish, and salt water as well.
Might wrap up on their teeth.
Yeah.
Can they lose their teeth? Do they regrow their teeth? Another one that's popped up a lot is, can they eat without teeth?
Yeah, so they can eat without teeth. It's a little bit difficult in the wild to eat a prey item if you don't have any teeth, and that is typically how those really old crocs die. They find it really hard to get enough food. They can't grip onto the animal, they can't drag it into the water like they typically be doing, so they can die as a result of losing their teeth. But a healthy croc in the prime of their life like this, they do lose their teeth. Your average croc has between 64 and 72 teeth. All of them are replaced throughout their life. They do grow back. So they can lose the teeth, they do grow back, but eventually when they get to a certain age, they stop growing back and they lose the teeth completely.
I know I said that was the last question, but a lot of people are asking, is Elvis the same size as Eric?
I've never worked with Eric, but I think Elvis is a little bit larger. Eric might have been a little bit fatter, a little bit more rotund, a bit bigger around the belly. Elvis is quite slim, slender, very streamlined, but I think he is a little bit longer. He's about 4.6 meters in length and, as I mentioned, 450 kilos, and we estimate he's in his mid-50s. We love him. He's a beautiful animal. We're going to finish on a shot of him sitting there in that nice afternoon sun. We hope you enjoyed that today. We are going to bring you a lot more content as we go through the weeks, including, no doubt, more of Elvis, so stick around, enjoy the videos with us. We've loved doing them, and we'll see you next time. Thank you guys. Cheers. Bye.